Last year, I made a controversial video stating that Intel's 10th generation CPUs weren't worth it. But now, I want to retract that statement because they're looking like a really good deal. Let's discuss that in this video. Hey, if you enjoy content like this, drop a like, make sure to subscribe, and smash that bell so you never miss another video. Hey, what is going on guys? Danny here, welcome back to the channel and I hope you've all been doing well. In this video, we're going to be discussing Intel's 10th generation CPUs, and why you might want to consider buying them due to the current CPU market circumstances. When these CPUs initially came out, I wrote them off as not being worth it, and of course there were many who didn't agree with that statement. This was because at the time these CPUs compared to AMD's Ryzen 3000 series seemed like a terrible value. The 10900K was significantly more expensive than the 3900X at the time. We're talking about a $100 or more difference. There's no included cooler, Z490 motherboards were also quite expensive, and they were also missing important new features such as PCI Express 4.0. Therefore, this meant that you couldn't use the newest and fastest NVMe drives to their fullest potential, and there was a concern for performance loss when the latest PCI Express 4.0 GPUs would come out. The only advantage they offered catered to a very niche audience, and that was better gaming performance for higher refresh rate gamers who competitively play esports titles, and even in that regard, Zen 2 wasn't far behind. The 10th generation series was nothing more than Skylake with more cores, slightly higher clock speeds, and all CPUs having hyper-threading enabled, which Intel really should have done this a long time ago. In late 2020, AMD had released the Ryzen 5000 series, and things just got even worse for Intel. The new processors based on their latest Zen 3 architecture brought significant advancements in various areas. Enhancements such as boasting higher clock speeds, significantly lower latency, and a whopping 19% IPC improvement over the previous generation Zen 2 architecture. This resulted in AMD widening the gap even more in areas they already had an advantage in, such as multi-core performance, performance per watt, and despite each SKU being slightly bumped up in terms of pricing, many were quick to say RIP Intel. Now, if you want to see a thorough in-depth review of one of the Ryzen 5000 CPUs, I recently did one for the Ryzen 9 5900X, testing it in various applications, video editing, and a 19-game benchmark. Video for that will be in the description below. These 5000 series parts were fast, very fast, and had also managed to finally take away the last advantage Intel still held on to, and this was their gaming crown. It didn't matter what scenario you found yourself in. Doing a budget or value-oriented build, go Ryzen 3000 series. Want to build a great workstation PC, but don't necessarily want to step up to HEDT, then go Ryzen 5000. Or even CPUs like the 3900X and 3950X still offer impeccable performance in that area. And finally, if you want the absolute best gaming performance, then the Ryzen 5000 series CPUs are the chips to buy. It seemed like at this point there was no reason to buy Intel anymore and that the DIY market would be completely dominated by AMD. Well, that is what would have happened if we were living with normal conditions, but it didn't pan out the way everyone expected it would be. You see, with the global health crisis that has been plaguing the world, every single sector and industry has been impacted. Some more than others, but we've seen factories shut down, manufacturing plants operate at limited capacity, and logistics being run so thinly. In addition, with everyone spending more and more time at home, whether it's because of lockdown restrictions, virtual learning, or utilizing a home office, the demand for computers and computer parts has skyrocketed. So with manufacturers struggling to produce supply at a rate which they normally operate at, and with demand increasing more than ever, this has created an immense shortage. More specifically, AMD has been extremely constrained due to the fact that basically their entire product portfolio depends on TSMC's 7nm node. From desktop CPUs, HEDT, server chips, GPUs, and of course consoles which sell by millions of units. Though every single segment is experiencing shortages, AMD seems to be prioritizing console SoCs, which makes sense, but this also does hurt supply for the rest of their product stack. Due to this, the 5000 series have been extremely difficult to buy. They're hardly ever in stock. When they are in stock, they're being sold way above MSRP, and I'm still seeing countless comments from people who had placed orders during the first launch week and, still haven't gotten their CPU. And the Ryzen 9 SKUs in particular are really bad. Now, while someone could opt for a Ryzen 3000 series CPU such as the 3600, for example, as a placeholder, because of the demand, I've noticed the prices for all these parts has gone up considerably. Sure, you can still go into your local hardware store and buy a 3900X or 3600. The supply isn't as bad as it is for the 5000 series, but they're not as cheap as they once were. I remember you could easily find a Ryzen 5 3600 selling for around $150 US, which I thought was a fantastic price, but now you're looking at around $200. A 3900X could have easily been had for less than $400 at one point, and that's also why I wrote off the 3000 XT series as well. I don't just call out one company's products and ignore their competitor, yet I'm still called an Intel or AMD fanboy. You can't win either way. On the other hand, when we take a look at Intel, now they're finding themselves to be in a much more desirable spot. It's astonishing to see what has happened in the span of 10 months. There's this saying amongst the PC hardware community that there are never bad products, just bad pricing, and that's definitely true. You see, prices for Intel's 10th generation CPUs have gone down considerably as of recently. This is due to various factors, but Intel seems to have a much more reliable supply of 10th gen CPUs compared to AMD, as they have their own fabs and are still utilizing an extremely mature 14nm process. So you can walk into your local hardware store and reliably be able to pick up a 10600K or 10850K. Also, Intel will soon be releasing their 11th gen Rocket Lake processors with new Z590 motherboards in the coming months, so retailers are starting to clear out inventory. So they're selling them with some hefty discounts. Taking a look at some prices, a 10-core i9 10850K is currently listed over at Micro Center for just $350. Compared to that, a Ryzen 9 3900X is $450. That's a $100 difference. Now, there of course can be selling points for both. The 3900X has more cores resulting in better multi-core performance, whereas the 10850K will offer better gaming performance. That said though, the 10850K still has 10 cores and 20 threads and, would offer pretty good multi-core performance. And so you're getting the best of both worlds there. It's interesting to see just how much the tables have turned, because when the i9 10900K was released, it was going for around $500 or so, and the 3900X was around $100 cheaper. Here in Canada, the differences are even more profound. The 10850K can be bought for around $530, whereas the 3900X is $130 more expensive. If you want to look at this from a different perspective, the 10th gen CPUs also look more appealing than the 5000 series, and this is because higher tiered parts like the i7s are the same price as lower tiered, lower core count parts like the R5 5600X. Currently, you can find a 10700K for around $280, whereas the 5600X goes for around $300, if not more. So gaming performance is generally about the same with these CPUs. Maybe the 5600X might edge it out in most scenarios, although not by a huge margin, but then you get better multi-core performance on the 10700K. If you want to just compare 6 cores versus 6 cores for a more apples to apples comparison, then it gets even worse, as the 10600K is cheaper than both a 3600 and 5600X. The same can be said for the i7s versus R7s as well. Here you can find a 10700KF for around $430, meanwhile the 5800X is going for $200 more, which is just absolutely absurd. It feels really strange to say this, but Intel is clearly offering better value than AMD these days, which used to be AMD's stronghold all these years. Now, I could continue to do more comparisons between different CPU SKUs, but I'm sure you guys get the point. Now, Z490 boards also have gotten quite a bit cheaper. They're still on the pricier side, but not nearly as bad as they were when they initially came out. So when I went on to PC Part Picker, I made 2 builds, one with a 5800X and the other using a 10700K. Both lists have the same parts, except the only things changed are of course the CPUs and compatible motherboards. Also, just as a placeholder, I added a more appropriate price for the 3080. I know right now the GPU market is messed up and it's extremely difficult to get a 3080 at reasonable prices, but let's just pretend the stock was normal for this scenario. Here we find a difference of around $140 for the builds in favor of the Intel build, and that's with the AMD build using a cheaper B550 motherboard. Overall performance between the two systems should be similar for the average user. They'll both offer exceptional gaming performance and allow the user to dive into other computing areas like content creation or streaming. Now, I won't just end this off by saying, hey, Intel is cheaper, so now go buy them, because there are advantages on the AMD side where the user will have to decide if it's worth it for them. I'm not going to write off either side here. The AMD build will give you new features like PCIe 4.0, although as of now, I feel like the full benefits of higher bandwidth provided by this new interface haven't really been fully realized yet for the average consumer. I mean, benchmarks have shown that even for a fast card like the RTX 3090, the difference between PCIe 3.0 and 4.0 is, for the most part, negligible. Also, unless you're editing videos at 8K 60fps with insane bitrates, then you'll be fine with a Gen 3 NVMe. I feel like right now, for PCIe specs, we're in a position where the hardware capabilities have superseded the demands of most software. Going back to the topic on hand, you'll also get a better upgrade path where you can drop in a 5950X, and now you'll have doubled your core count. So these are just some things to consider when planning out your build. The bottom line is this: now Intel is a very viable option if you're in the market for a new PC build, since prices for the CPUs have dropped considerably and appear to be more reasonable than AMD, whereas before, unless you were in that niche category, then it just didn't seem like it would be worth it. At the end of the day, as consumers, we should be happy that we have this kind of competition in the market and don't have to deal with, one company running rampant, monopolizing all segments. The more options you have, the better, and more competition means better prices, so at the end of the day, consumers are the winner. I hope you guys found this video to be informative and helpful. Let me know your thoughts down below. Check out the video description on ways to support the channel and for my other videos. If you guys are interested in more content like this, then make sure you subscribe. Thanks for watching, take care, and I'll see you guys in the next one.